Good morning. We're going to switch gears a little bit this morning. I know I've been talking about how we feel as tax-paying American citizens if we're getting our money's worth or not. But I had kind of another question. Everybody knows I'm just a lay person here, right? Like I have no economics background or anything like this. I'm just kind of calling things as I see them. And I'm curious, when does the system break? I keep hearing that we're in late stage capitalism and this is kind of where we are, but I don't know that we're necessarily there yet. I because it hasn't broken, right? Like we're repeating habits from the Gilded Age. Sounds fancy, sounds amazing, sounds great. But if you do your homework on the Gilded Age, American citizens were making crap wages. This was back when unions started to protect American workers, and collective bargaining, had to be done because we were working ourselves to death for very little money, and there was a distinct line between a rather large line between the haves and the have-nots, and that line just kept getting bigger and bigger. That's kind of where we're at now, but again, I don't feel like we're in late stage capitalism yet. So my question is, when does the system break? At what point? At that point in time, there was nothing to distract us, right? We didn't have the conveniences that we have now. When exactly does everything start to break down? At what point are the American workers not making enough as a whole group, not making enough to sustain themselves because costs are too high, right? When do we price ourselves out of day-to-day living? Or rather, I should say, when does corporate greed price the average American citizen out of day-to-day living? I'm sure that there are those that'll be like, well, it's just a matter of not having your Starbucks latte, blah, blah, blah. You can't save yourself out of costs going up. You can't. You just absolutely cannot. Are there ways that you can kind of safeguard your future before we get to that point? Sure. But for those who are entering the economy, entering the workforce, are millennials, even people who, may have to start over because whatever, maybe their company went under or whatever the case. At what point does the pain of just day-to-day living, paying the mortgage or the rent, or combined with the cost of utilities and necessities, when does that get to the point to where we're already have probably reached the point where most Americans are finding that small pleasures are starting to go away? So when do we reach the point that we, as a whole, I understand that there are Americans that are already making the decision between, do I heat my home this winter, or do I pay rent, or do I buy groceries, or do I buy, medicine I need to survive? We're already at that point. So at what point do we hit the tipping point where companies have paid so little, yet they're raking in record profits? At what point does that system break down to where the consumer, us, we don't have the funds anymore because we're paid so little to survive? At what point, there's a lot of us that don't get a cost of living adjustment every year, right? There's lots of jobs that don't do that. There's lots of jobs that don't offer any kind of increase in pay for whatever reason, right? Be it cost of living adjustment or what's the words I'm looking for? Production wages. So you meet certain metrics and, your wages go up, what have you. Or, performance raises. There's lots of companies that don't offer that. Especially if you work in, a commissionable job, like you work in, like say car sales or real estate sales or any kind of sales where it's commission based, right? Those are those, earn what you're worth kind of positions. Well, at some point in time, even those jobs are going to be hit with the fact that nobody can buy. I'm seeing kind of lots of videos in my feeds about like the car market apparently is starting to take a hit because nobody can afford cars anymore. The average American is being priced out of that. The average American is being priced out of housing, has been for a hot minute now. My case in point, my youngest daughter, she works a full-time job as a teacher. She also has a part-time job, and not even just accounting for the student loans, she does not make enough money to live on her own. She should. She absolutely should. But as a full-time public school teacher, science teacher at that, we're not even talking like, some could argue that, oh, well, it's a liberal art, blah, blah, blah. No. We're not even talking that. We're talking like hard science here. Science teacher, and she is smart with her money. She is incredibly smart with her money. She's been tight with a dollar since she was little. And she is priced out of living on her own. I'm not even talking about like buying a home. We're talking about like just finding an apartment somewhere. She is priced out of that. She couldn't afford that, plus her car payment, plus her insurance, her utilities, the necessities you need to live. Like, she couldn't do that. And she has a part-time tutoring job as well, which pays pretty well. But it's also part-time and it's intermittent. And, while she may have 1 or 2 sessions a week, sometimes she has them almost every day. It varies, right? But at what point, like, people are getting to the points where even the tutoring it's too pricey, right? And because of where she works, a lot of her customers are more well-to-do individuals, but even they're feeling the squeeze, right? So at what point does the whole system break down? At what point do these companies, have they officially priced us out of living? At what point do the manufacturers, do the retailers, at what point do they price their customers, which are also in a lot of cases the people that work for them, price them out of living? And what happens when that happens, right? What happens when you have workers who are working for your company, but they can't make ends meet? They can't, they don't have a roof over their head anymore, or they don't have a vehicle to get to and from work anymore. I'm sure there's somebody who'd be like, well, there'll be somebody who will take their job. Yeah, sure, okay, touche. And there'll be somebody who'll be happy to work for those wages to have something versus nothing. But at some point, the whole system seems to me like it would break down. there's a point where you price people out of everything. And I know this is going to be kind of an extreme example, and it's been for a very long time something that's a luxury, and people who can't afford any kind of luxuries can't afford this. But Disney is taking a lot of heat because, and has been for the last year or so, because some of their most ardent supporters, some of the people that are dedicated, we save up for however long, be it we save up every year for a trip, or we save up until we've got money every couple of years for a trip. Even they're getting to the point where they're like, yeah, no, you know what? It's not worth, the juice ain't worth the squeeze anymore. The service ain't Disney service anymore. The amount of what I'm getting from my Disney vacation isn't equal to the amount of money that I'm putting into said Disney vacation. And I use that as an example just because it's one of those things that you can kind of just point to and go, this, right? But we're seeing that even in like grocery stores. So I, just as something to do while I was healing from recent surgery, I started baking, and I was determined to do everything from scratch and not things from a box. But I was curious. So I had heard about shrinkflation. If you don't know what that is, it's you're paying the same amount. Like the cost hasn't gone down. It's the cost, the actual dollary dues on the price tag is the exact same. However, there's less in the container that you're buying. And I can remember just a few years ago, you could get a box cake mix and it would tell you how to make 24 cupcakes, right? And now it's 18 cupcakes, a dozen and a half. First of all, that's so annoying because most of us, I think, that own cupcake tins that have 12 little cupcake spots on them. And that's just frustrating. But then you have then you start thinking about it more on a cost comparison basis, and now you're quite literally getting less for your dollar. And we're getting ripped off at every available opportunity. And we're doing it to ourselves, by the way. I know I have said this before. I even did a whole TikTok about it. But we're doing this to ourselves because we keep buying into this system. So who hasn't gone into a fast food restaurant and seen a self-service kiosk? Who hasn't gone into a retailer or a grocery store and seen the self-checkout lanes, right? For every self-checkout lane you see, that's an American job, right? That's an American job that has gone away. And eventually, these things are going to be so automated that the American worker is going to be a thing of the past. Without people that are going to be able to maintain this equipment and whatnot, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. And you see that also with online purchases. I said this before, I will scream it from the rooftops. Please, 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 if you truly, truly want to support the American worker, shop local. Even if it's your local big box store, even if it's a local major corporation, shop local. Because at least you're keeping that money and those jobs in your community, right? For every purchase that you make and you use and utilize a real live person at these places, you're keeping the jobs local. The more that these companies, and this goes back hand in hand to, what happens when we are priced out of just living. There's going to be a point where everything is so automated that The jobs aren't going to be needed anymore. So what happens when the average American citizen can't find a job because it wasn't the foreigners that were taking our jobs, it was the automation that took our jobs, right? We haven't even touched on AI. I haven't even talked about that. We're talking about something that has happened before. There are lots of us that still remember, especially our Gen X people and our boomers, who remember, our parents or our grandparents who had jobs, especially in my neck of the woods and, where I'm originally from in Northwest Indiana. There were steel mills up there. Like, you had a great job if you got out of high school and you got into the steel mill, you worked your way up into the company. Those were great jobs. They were also union jobs, which I can't stress enough. Like, I don't understand why the American public, there's so much anti-union sentiment. Like, I understand, like, if you don't like the benefits a company offers, then don't work there. However, companies will always look through history. I promise you it's there. Look at the Gilded Age. Look at the crimes that these companies committed before they were actually crimes. Their companies will always go the cheapest possible route. Always. And if that means sacrificing safety, if that means sacrificing value, if that means sacrificing whatever it is they're sacrificing, and they have the opportunity to do it, they will absolutely do it. There is no such thing as a benevolent corporate entity, in my opinion. Not. Are there some that are better than others? Sure. I will grant you that. I love the company that I work for, but it's not perfect. There's no company out there that's perfect. It's also a smaller company. They take great care of me and my staff. Do I have my complaints? Sure. There's no such thing as a perfect job. But the larger a company is, especially when you're talking about manufacturing, or look at some of the sins that a company like Amazon has been fielding over the past few years. Walmart took a lot of heat for employee dissatisfaction. The bigger a company is, the more corners they're willing to cut. And it's a problem. This is why we had unions in the first place. This is why they were created. So let's, maybe look at some historical context here and learn some lessons from it instead of trying to repeat it all over again. Even then, there were safeguards in place. We had individuals that were put in positions of, I hate to use the word power because it's so overused, but that were put in positions of power that could affect these companies and the laws that regulated these companies and kept them honest. And I feel like those safeguards aren't there anymore. The only thing that these individuals are doing are looking out for corporate interests and not those of the American workers. So what happens when the American workers can't afford anything, when we can't buy anymore? What happens to the corporations when they're not earning money because they've paid their employees so little that those employees' funds are literally just going into survival mode? Like, there's going to come a point where the system just breaks down. And I'm curious when, if anybody has an idea of when that might happen, or, what are the signs that that's going to happen. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're quickly approaching that. And that's kind of terrifying, because then the workers don't have money to pay into taxes, which goes back to my previous videos. They don't have the money to pay into taxes, which then affects infrastructure services like your emergency services or road maintenance, construction, whatever it may be. Those things now start to break down because the funds are no longer there. So at what point do we hit the problem areas, right? And what happens, right? I'm sure there's going to be people that are like, you know, we have the vote still, right? And we can vote in people that'll change the laws to make that happen. And that's another concern I have. And I know this is probably at least somewhat on the conspiratorial side, but I have real concerns for elections going forward with the state of things right now and how free and fair they're really going to be for us. The one thing I have always learned is people tell you who they are. And lots of times they do that by this thing called projection, which is they will talk about things that somebody else is doing wrong because they see it, because they themselves know what to look for because they're guilty of it, right? Completely off topic example. Lots of times, not always, but lots of times, if you have a partner in a relationship that's all like, you're cheating, and is persistent on it, and is, you know, constantly looking at your phone, or, you know, constantly worried that you're communicating to somebody or what have you, chances are they're probably doing it themselves. Is that always the case? No. Sometimes it's just paranoid delusion. Sometimes it's insecurities, what have you. But there's a lot of cases of this happening. And, you know, we see a lot of that projection coming in the political sphere, where you have politicians that are all like, you're guilty of doing this, or this party is guilty of doing this. And then you start looking at the actual evidence and come to find out you're guilty of that, or it at least appears you're guilty of that. So I just wonder at what point everything breaks down, right? And what do we do at that point when, you know, we don't have the abilities to fight back anymore? Just some food for thought. I know it's kind of a downer for a Thursday, but it's on my mind, and I wanted to put it out there and see if anybody who maybe has some education behind this, who, you know, maybe you're a historical scholar, maybe you know quite a bit about like the Gilded Age and what happened then. I know cursory stuff about that. I don't know like all the gory details about all the corporate greed and how that ended. I know it did, and I know it did through a lot of legislation, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of that came through with Roosevelt, I believe. And I'm just curious. Is this what we're looking at? Are we looking at a future of, you know, we as Americans, we've gotten so caught up in let me get mines that we are completely losing the plot and we're sabotaging our own future? When I say this, I'm not just talking about just, you know, you and me, but like, are these corporations, can they not see the forest for the trees? Are they not realizing that if they can't pay a true living wage, which I saw a video the other day that the poverty line, when adjusted for all the costs of living, is somewhere around 140,000. The maths, but wow. If they don't understand that they really need to pay their workers enough to where they can afford to have a decent living, then who's going to be buying their stuff, right? Like, it can't just be all of their cronies and friends just buying all the groceries or all the clothing or what have you. Like, at what point does all of that break down? And I'm just curious. Again, this is all about having a discussion, and I hope y'all have it with me. But this is the end of my commute this morning. I hope everybody has a glorious day, and we'll hopefully be talking again soon. Thank you for making it this far in the video. As always, hit the like, hit the subscribe, add some comments. Some engagement is amazing. I am still over the moon that I got as many comments and I got some likes. I'm now up to 5 on that previous video on return on investment with our taxes. So let's keep the conversation going. I haven't had any other videos, any other likes or whatnot on my other videos, but a like and a subscribe and hit the bell so that way you know when I upload. I'm trying very, very hard to upload at least once a week and trying to be consistent with that. Also, I do have a Redbubble store that I really do need to add some more designs to. But if you'll at least go to my store and like some of the designs, it would be most appreciated. And I hope everybody has a blessed day. I'll have the link, by the way, for that in the description below. Have a great and wonderful day. Thank you for being here. Thank you for waiting until and watching to the end of the video. Everybody be blessed.